Okay, well, hello everyone, and a good day. We're excited to join you to talk a little bit about what you should know
Before signing
uh,
a lease.
signing a lease. Yes, so we are here to talk directly to you, our residence hall students, and also our families of our residence hall students. And my name is Dr. Jeremy Moore. I'm the Assistant Director here in Off-Campus Housing and Neighborhood Relations. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and neighbor next door, physically here in our building, Denean. And I'll let Denean introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Denean Hill. I'm the Interim Director of Student Legal Services here at CU Boulder.
So you're going to learn a little bit more about both of our offices today, and we're also going to talk about some of the, what I like to call tricky pickles that one might encounter when they are looking for housing off campus or for leases. So we'll go through a little bit of those things today. Before we get into this though, if you have any questions, I'm going to encourage, and Denean's also going to encourage you to jot those down. And at the very end of today's presentation, we've got our contact information. We certainly encourage you to reach out to either of our offices. We'd be more than happy to help you further. Okay, so starting off, we'll talk a little bit about what I like to lovingly refer to as OCHNR, or Off-Campus Housing and Neighborhood Relations. That's quite the tongueful there. So what do? So we are a student fee-funded cost center. So we are under student government here at CU Boulder, and we do a couple of things in our mission statement. We help students like yourselves make good choices about housing and roommates. Very important to pick good roommates, and sometimes best friends do not always make the best roommates, as we've learned in our many years of operation. We encourage students like yourselves to become knowledgeable and responsible tenants and community members. So not only, you're not just moving off campus, you also have requirements and responsibilities as a member of our larger community, city ordinances, county ordinances, and we've got many of those things going on. This year with our pandemic, there's been some special things that have been happening. So we want to make sure that you know about those things, and we work to educate you on those. We also assist students with skills to problem solve when any sort of tricky pickles might occur with landlords or roommates. And so we're here to help you work through those things. And we hope that they don't happen. We hope that we're proactively helping you with those things on the front end. But if they do happen, we're here to help support you on the back end reactively. We advocate for an off-campus student perspective to landlords and to the city of Boulder. So we work to champion and advocate for your needs as students living here in the community. You're part of the CU Boulder community, but you're also part of the city of Boulder community. And some of you might even live outside of Boulder. So you're part of those communities as well. And we help incoming and new students and students like yourselves when you're transitioning from different living situations. So whether you're joining CU for the first time or whether you're living in the residence halls or Bear Creek this year and you're going to be moving off into a independent living situation next year, we're going to be here to help support you through those processes. So how do you find housing? So there's a couple ways that you can go about finding housing. And the first way, our primary resource is Ralphie's list. I emphasize the S because it is plural. So like our buffalo that runs across the field during football, when we have football games in person, Ralphie is our school mascot. So Ralphie's list, all one word, .colorado.edu, there as on the slide. That will take you to our rental database and you'll log in with your identity and password. And this provides a comprehensive listing of available housing in the area, and the landlords are responsible themselves for updating these. And most times they are pretty up to date. Some of our landlords even have direct systems that link with our database. Sometimes though properties might be a little stale. So we encourage you always to reach out to the property manager or landlord, and usually they'll include their contact information on those listings. Students, you can also post sublets, which is where you would be having someone take over your lease term. Say you decided to go and do an internship over the summer, or you decided to leave for a semester, you could have someone take over your sublet. So you can post those for free on our rental database. You can also search for roommates. And again, best friends don't always make the best roommates. I'll say it early and I'll say it often. But this is a great way to search by class year, by different living preferences. So say for example, you're very sensitive to smoke, like if somebody smokes cigarettes, you can actually filter through on the listings. Or if somebody has a pet, for example, and pet dander is something that doesn't jive well with you, you can search for those things in a potential roommate. We have an apartment complex guide, which is about a 23-page, fairly comprehensive PDF document This is available on our website. This is also available on Ralphie's list. This includes local apartment communities in the area. You can search by on that list. It'll list, you know, how far away it is, if it's walking, biking, or busing. It also has lists of amenities. Keep in mind, this is not updated as regularly as Ralphie's list. So this also does not have real-time availability. It's just a list to kind of use as another tool in your toolkit when you're looking for finding housing. Speaking of other tools in your toolkit, there's other resources such as the Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, or some of these different groups like the CU Boulder Housing group on Facebook. Keep in mind, a lot of these are not directly affiliated with CU or with our office. We are just providing them as additional resources for you all as you're looking through things. And keep in mind, if it sounds too good to be true, chances are it is too good to be true. And if you ever have any concerns or questions around something that does seem too good to be true, we're going to encourage you to also reach out to us to kind of talk through that. So that way you're protecting yourself. Sublets and roommates, like I mentioned earlier, can be found on Ralphie's list. And then also, and this is also listed in the first page of the apartment complex guide, different websites you can use beyond ours, because we know that our listings are not going to be every listing. You might, and especially if you're looking outside of Boulder, you might be able to find other options. So Zillow.com, apartments.com. I see we dropped an N there on that. So it's apartments.com, and then Trulia.com and housinghelpers.com. So there's a couple different websites there that you can peruse. So what about some of the popular neighborhood areas? So no surprise, Boulder, the CU Boulder campus is smack dab in the middle of that map right there. And all these different color-coded areas are our neighborhoods that many of our students choose to live in. You know, a misconception that a lot of students might have is that permanent residents don't live in all of these areas. And in fact, we do have students and permanent residents living in every single one of these areas. So the Hill is not just students. We have other community members living there as well, many of which who've lived there most of their lives. So the Hill is going to be where a lot of our second year students might choose to live. It's a lot of our Greek style housing, definitely going to be a lot more house style options. North Boulder is where a lot of our upper division students might choose to live. And that is something that I don't necessarily recommend as strongly for our second year students or third year students. And then we have Goss Grove, which is kind of down towards the Pearl Street commercial area, if you've ever been there, very popular area. And then East Aurora is an area where we see a lot of our second year students choosing to live. It's what I consider to be more of a student purpose-built area. I put that in air quotes because it's not just students, again, exclusively students, but there is a lot of students living there. So this is where you're gonna find a lot of the 9-month leases, the fully furnished Posturepedic beds, the tanning salons, the doggy wash stations, all of those amenities. And keep in mind, some of those amenities might be unfortunately closed right now due to the pandemic, but this is where a lot of our students might choose to live if they're looking for more of that residence life experience. So a lot of these are almost like residence halls. They have sometimes even live-in staff or front desks, but they're not the same as our residence halls. And they're not affiliated directly with CU Boulder either, is an important note. So this could be a good area to look at if you're looking specifically for like 9-month leases, and that's the East Aurora community. And then finally, the Martin Acres community is your post-World War II cul-de-sac community, street parking, small houses. So this can be a great option too. All of these are fairly accessible if you're walking, biking, longboarding. You can also bus. All CU students get a Eco Pass or a College Pass. You probably already have that if you're a current student. And you can use that to get around locally or regionally on RTD, Regional Transit, cannot talk today, Denean, Regional Transit District, there we go, bus system. And those, you can actually look at the bus listings on Ralphie's list for each listing. It'll actually tell you what the bus lines are compared to getting to campus here. Really quickly, our average rental rates. So this is not an exact science. We pull this every year more for representation for folks to look at. So if you're getting something higher or lower, it doesn't mean you're getting ripped off. And something to note is some of the listings on here, like the 1-bedrooms, oftentimes that's a very volatile inventory option just because there's not as many of those in the marketplace. So that tends to fluctuate quite a bit more. Also, as we get new inventory, new buildings, new construction, there's the keeping up with the Joneses effect. That means that sometimes our rents do rise and then sometimes they will fall as the market adjusts. Luckily right now, trending in 2020, we're starting to see that the rates are staying pretty stable. They're not rising a ton. They might just have a little bit of cost inflation, but right now they're staying pretty stable. Also important to know, anything between the 2 and 4 bedroom range, most likely you would be splitting this with multiple roommates. So you would be taking the 1,800 or the 3,600 and dividing that amongst 2 or 3 or 4 folks. The city of Boulder does have an over occupancy ordinance. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on today in our slideshow. But this is also just base rent averages. So remember, you usually have to add on things like cable, internet. I'm sure many of you would not want to go without internet, and other things like your trash and recycling. We'll also hit on that here in a bit too. So with that being said, very, very quickly, I'm going to pass it over to Denean to talk a little bit more about her office, and I'll be chiming in. Both of us will be chiming in throughout the rest of the slides as we're going through some of these different topics.
Thanks. So what Student Legal Services is, it's a small law office on campus that serves the student population. The long and short of it is we are here to help students with legal issues that they have so that they can focus on school, you know, keep doing well, hopefully in their classes, that sort of thing. We do landlord tenant, obviously. We are here with OCHNR today. I do want you to know that we do other things too. Criminal, you know, students get in trouble sometimes, unfortunately. Student conduct, we deal with honor code issues, and then, you know, whatever else a lot of times happens to walk in the door. Maybe it's an employment issue or a debt collection or something like that. We do a lot of different areas of law, and we are here as a resource, and we want you to know that. Today, of course, we're talking about landlord tenant, and we're going to go through these slides, and the slides are going to point out sort of, you know, problems that we see most often from CU Boulder students, but we're not going to go into detail into all the slides. So basically the purpose of this today is to get you to realize what issues are there, and then of course to follow up either with OCHNR or with our office so that you can talk to a lawyer if you have any questions about it. So with that being said, first things first, promises from landlords. Don't rely on anything the landlord says unless it's in writing. You know, most leases have a provision. If it's not in the lease, it's not part of the lease, and it doesn't matter what anybody promised you ahead of time.
And from the tenant perspective, we're going to encourage you to oftentimes put your communication in writing as well, just so you have a record of what things. So if you have a phone conversation with your landlord or property manager, it's always helpful to do a recap email just to say, hey, this is what it, so you have it for your records in case anything ever comes up later, and make sure you have times and things like that if you're following up. But this is good practice for life.
And names
are very important. This is good practice for life anyway in the future, regardless of your housing situation, just for other things, like if you're calling for customer service or whatever.
Okay, Jeremy talked about this. Know the occupancy limit. The city of Boulder has, for quality of life reasons, has, you know, limits on how many people can live in a particular unit, how many people can live together, and it can be extremely expensive if you were to violate that. You can also end up in a situation where, you know, you might lose a friend or two over, you know, somebody got kicked out and they're now not paying rent, and now your rent's higher. So something definitely to look out for here.
We want to avoid the sandpaper effect, and we do know that sometimes students will over-occupy because of cost. So if you ever have any concerns around affordability or your budget, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to our office so that we can help you with that process on the front end, because we don't want anyone to be evicted. We don't want anyone to have any fines, and this is a complaint-based system. So oftentimes this is going to stem from trash, noise, cars, those kind of things. It's going to be more of a quality of life kind of thing where folks are going to, it's a complaint-based system.
Lease Guarantee, this is where parents, you guys come in. Most leases in Boulder require a guarantor, such as a parent, and that person is guaranteeing every single thing under the lease that the lessees, the students who are living in the unit, are responsible for. So, you know, for students living in the unit, one of them decides they're not going to go to school anymore, they drop out, they decide they want to not pay rent. Everybody else, including the guarantors, are responsible for that. Insurance, this one's a little odd to me, but some leases require insurance to cover landlord liability, but also, this is the part that's weird, to cover your own property. I don't know why, but whether it does or whether it doesn't, it's something that you might want to think about. We had a flood here in 2013, and most of the basement units on the hill completely flooded. People lost everything they owned, essentially. So, you know, something definitely to think about.
And for our parents in the virtual audience today, I would encourage you to take a look at your homeowner's policy. Sometimes this will extend to a college student who might be attending, you know, away from home. It oftentimes will only cover, though, the property. So think bikes, laptops, things like that. And sometimes this can cost you more in the long run versus just getting the renter's insurance, which is usually no more than a couple $100 a year. It ends up being like less than $100 a month, usually like $15, $20 we're talking each month. So a couple $100 a year. So certainly encourage you all to look into that for your student, and for the students to look into that for yourself as well.
Okay, joint and several lease. This one is very important to take note of. Most of the leases in and around Boulder are joint and several leases, meaning everybody on the lease is jointly and severally liable. Jointly meaning together, and severally meaning individually. And this goes back to what I was saying about the guarantors. If somebody decides not to pay rent, everybody else that's in a joint and several lease with that person is responsible. So know whether your lease is joint and several, pick your roommates carefully, and, you know, go from there. Rent, what you should know about rent. When's it due? How is it paid? When it's late, and what happens if it's late? These are things that can cause actually problems quite often with students. They don't understand when it's due. They don't understand what happens, that if they're late, then they get assigned a fee, and then, you know, things can snowball from there. So very important to know.
Yeah, and most of our landlords in the area are going to have portals and things that you'll be paying this through. You can sometimes even set up auto pay, but you want to look into things like, for example, if you're using credit cards, most companies unfortunately do pass on credit card transaction fees and things like that. So you want to look into all of those things. And also making sure that your roommates, however you're divvying out, or if that's automatic, like if the landlord's only charging you your portion, oftentimes you're going to have to go in and make sure everybody's paying their part with that when you're on those joint and several liable leases. And this brings us to who's responsible for what? All the different things.
Yes, all the things. So just like it says on the slide, you know, is it you or the landlord that's paying for electric, gas, water, trash, etc.? How is lawn care and snow shoveling in the winter going to be handled? Plumbing problems, you know, all of these things. Replacing light bulbs at the end of the lease, replacing the trays that go under the burners on the stove. And then how are common areas going to be handled? You know, any cleaning of those, is it divided up equally between the folks who share that common area?
And for some of these, we've got some incredible campus partners like our environmental center, or even like the fire department here in Boulder, where they can assist with some of these things. Like if your smoke detector needs new batteries, or you want to make sure that it's working properly, or the environmental center can actually come in and do an eco visit where they can check the sustainable features or lack of sustainable features in your home, and help with some of those things. You just want to make sure you're looping your landlord in if they're changing anything. We're talking like low flow shower head kind of things and stuff like that, but you still want to make sure your landlord's aware of those things. But this is important. In some of those newer properties I was talking about earlier in the East Aurora neighborhood specifically, they might bundle things in like your internet, your trash, your compost. That's going to up your price of your rent, but sometimes that might be easier for you if you want to have everything bundled and not a la carte. So you don't have to worry about splitting, because remember, you're going to split the cost of cable and internet with your roommates as well. And that can cause some additional complications if folks aren't up to date with paying you, if you're the one that's on the bill. So you want to make sure, again, you're picking good roommates, people that are going to be reliable and trustworthy.
Repairs. This is something we see fairly often. You know, landlords don't fix things, but sometimes it's because the issue hasn't been reported properly. So no, you know, in your lease, it should lay out when and how to report issues, and then make sure you're taking note of any special requirements if there's an emergency of any sort, or if you have mold or some kind of criminal activity at the house that causes damages to the house that need to be repaired. All that's really important to know, and that you're reporting properly so that you can hold the landlord to repairing. Privacy, yes. Know what the lease says about notice that the landlord has to provide before coming in. And as it says in here in all caps, no, there's no 24-hour rule. That just doesn't exist. I don't know where students get it from, but there's no such thing as that. Generally speaking, what you're talking about is reasonable entry into the unit. And then, they tend to release very early here. So do you have to keep the apartment in a certain condition for the landlord to come in and show it? Extra costs. Sometimes there's things like on a roof. If you go on the roof, it's a $1,000 fine, or whatever. Know how much those fees, fines, and costs are. What's going to cause the landlord to charge them to you. Whether or not those fees and fines are valid is a different story, but you are left in the position of having to defend against them. And then, of course, there's the snowball effect that I talked about earlier. So also, if you know what they are, you can avoid them.
Yeah, and something we didn't mention earlier, there's a good example of this would be a lot of times folks living on the hill might have to pay extra for additional parking spaces. The unit might include X number, and if you have X number of students living in the property legally, you might only get 1 or 2 spaces, but have 3 or 4 of you. So this is something, again, make sure you're getting in writing up front, and make sure that it's in the lease, those kind of things, or that you have documentation for that kind of thing. Also, speaking of fees and costs, attorney fees and costs.
And this is one of those things that almost every lease has in it. Will the landlord assess attorney's fees to you or your student, depending, under some circumstances, like if they have to post a notice or if they have to go to court? And so know what those circumstances are. Also, really get into the meat of the attorney fee clause. What does it mean for somebody to prevail, if you're the prevailing party? What does that mean, and how does that affect you if you were to not prevail in court? A way out. This one's definitely come up this year because of COVID, even though we actually wrote this before COVID. Are you thinking ahead of time you might want to get out of the lease early, like you're going to study abroad or what have you? Check and see if the lease has an early termination clause or a sublet clause, and what you need to do to invoke that clause, and how much will it cost you. Also know if you're actually going to be getting out of the responsibilities of the lease or not. That can be very tricky, and you might have a subletter who decides to burn the place down, and you're on the hook for that, and so are your guarantors. So make sure you're understanding what it is that's happening when you're getting out of the lease.
Yep. So
Notice to renew.
This is one that's starting to come up this time of the year in the fall with pre-leasing and things that start.
Yeah, often, sometime like mid-October, the end of October, you have to tell us by then if you want to live in this place next year, even though you've only been living there, just a couple of months or so. And if you don't give proper notice, they can rent it right out from under you. So make sure you understand what needs to be done there.
Security deposits, one of the most common reasons that our services on both the Denean side and our office get used, particularly this time of the year for folks that have just finished out their last year's lease.
So, take photos and video. You've got your phone. Make sure you're turning in that check-in sheet on time. A lot of times students just sort of ignore it. They think the photos and video will cover it. Everything's got to be turned in. The lease probably says if you don't turn in your check-in sheet and you don't do it by this time, you're accepting responsibility for everything that's damaged in the unit, even though the unit might be, post-World War II. Then, of course, videos and photos when you move out, and, make sure you're taking note of if anything's going to be automatically charged to the security deposit, like carpet cleaning or house cleaning or anything.
If you think you've done enough due diligence with videos and photos, I'm going to ask you to go back and do another round. Some of our landlords have shared with our office in the past that they will take upwards of 400 photos for a single unit after the unit has been, folks have left that unit. And so it's very important that you have this. This is your documentation. So think of this as money when you are taking the photos and videos. So take a lot, back them up to Google Drive. You all have access to Google Drive through your CU account. So that you've got that.
Heat. We probably see this one a couple of times every year or so, especially for folks that are from warmer climes. They don't realize that they need to leave the heat on in the winter because the pipes can freeze. So they go home for the winter break and come back into, you know, $15,000, $25,000 worth of damage. Make sure everybody on the lease understands whoever the last one out is probably needs to leave that heat on. There might be a requirement in the lease, and if there isn't, you probably want to leave it on.
No one wants an unpredictable cascading waterfall. If you want a cascading waterfall, you can go to Casa Bonita and you can see the cliff divers there and have some sopapillas, but we do not want to see anyone have an unpredictable cascading waterfall. Unfortunately, I've seen a few of these in my career. They're not fun, particularly if you live on the top floor or if you live on the bottom floor and you're getting the downward, because everything goes downhill. So if you're the first unit, first floor, we don't want to see that. Notice to terminate.
Yep, just like with the notice to renew, some leases require tenants to give advance notice of termination, even though there's a date actually in the lease. They might say this lease automatically renews unless you give us 60 days notice or something like that. And if you don't properly give that notice, then you think you're out of the lease on July 31st, and yet you now owe them for 60 more days. So make sure you're taking note of that as well.
And this is something we don't see often because we don't have a ton of these units in the area, but those of you who might be looking for more shorter term options, this is oftentimes very clearly defined that, you know, you need to give a certain amount of time if it's month to month or a shorter term lease. And this is something we're seeing more commonly with COVID, folks negotiating different lease terms. Some of our landlords are being a little bit more flexible this year, which is great, but just make sure that you're taking note of that so you're not on the hook for another additional month when you thought you were done. Yep. Yep. Eviction. This is something we hope never happens, but it's important to know how it could happen.
Right. And I mean, some things are obvious like rent, but there are other things often listed in leases that can cause eviction. So make sure you read that.
Yes.
Early landlord termination. Again, back to that flood in 2013, you know, we had folks that, you know, properties were rendered unlivable, and so that terminated the lease by virtue of this provision in the lease. There also is in some leases a lease provision that says, hey, you know, if it's basically if I get somebody else interested in moving in and you're within the last month of your lease, then I can, you know, terminate the lease with 10 days of notice to you. So understand what could happen.
Lease end. Important to know when your end date and time will be. Oftentimes this is very clearly defined, like a 9 o'clock, not a 9:05, not a 9:10. So it's important to know when this is, because there could be some financial penalties if you stay beyond that time. As the song goes, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can't, how does it go? You can't stay here.
So it's closing time.
Closing time, yes.
And when Jeremy said 9 o'clock, he meant 9 o'clock in the morning, not 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock in the morning, exactly. So make sure you know AM or PM. Oftentimes it's going to be AM, not PM. So it can be very expensive if you stay beyond that time. And lease reviews.
Have a lawyer review the lease before you sign. Both Jeremy's office, OCHNR, and Student Legal Services offers that. We do it every day of the week. That's, well, weekdays, and it's $30 to $35 depending on what kind of student fees you're paying. OCHNR does it for free, but can only do it on Tuesdays and Fridays.
Yeah, our part-time attorney, Bruce Starbaugh, is only here on Tuesdays and Fridays. And keep in mind, a lot of these appointments are occurring, at least for our office, they're occurring remotely through Zoom in an effort to socially distance. And to set up an appointment for us, you just simply need to give us a call. We also have live chat on our website during the business day. However, on our next slide here, this is how you can get a hold of us. So for both of our offices to set up an appointment, you can give us a call, a jingle on either of our phone numbers here. We're also conveniently located next door to one another. So Student Legal Services is in 311, and we're next door neighbors in 313. And then here's our website. So colorado.edu/student legal, all one word, and then colorado.edu/off-campus, all one word. So on either of our websites, you can find out more information about eligibility. And again, these are services that are provided either for free or at a heavily subsidized, reduced cost for you all as students for part of your paying your student fees. And both of our offices are supported by student government.
Yes.
So this is a tremendous benefit to you all as students as well, because you can use these resources while you're a student. And the goal for both of our offices is to provide you independent life skills. So that way, when you go off to sign a lease after CU, the phrase goes, I'm going to probably mess this one up too, but we could give you fish today and you would eat for today. But if we can teach you to fish, then you will be able to fish for yourself. And so the goal is we're trying to provide those skills so that you can go out and go fish, and know what you're doing when you're signing leases in the future. So we really appreciate being able to spend a little bit of time briefly with you today to going over the resources that both OCHNR and Student Legal Services offer, and we encourage you to reach out to us early and often if there's things that we can help you with during your time here as a CU student. So with that being said, Sco Buffs!
Go Buffs!